The Hayes family estate did not merely sit at the end of Oakwood Drive, it presided over it. It was a sprawling, colonial-style monolith of white pillars, manicured boxwoods, and the kind of generational arrogance that took centuries to build and only one generation to quietly bankrupt. Inside the sun-drenched conservatory, the air was thick with the scent of expensive white lilies and the suffocating weight of maternal expectation. Standing in the center of the room, bathed in the afternoon light, was Chloe Hayes. At 35, she was the undisputed golden child of the Hayes dynasty. She was currently suffocating gracefully inside $70,000 worth of hand-stitched Chantilly lace and imported French silk. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of bridal engineering, designed to make her look like royalty, which was exactly how her mother, Beatrice, treated her. "Hold your breath, darling. Just a fraction more," Beatrice cooed, her perfectly manicured hands fluttering around Chloe's waist as a frantic seamstress pinned the hem. Beatrice Hayes was a woman whose entire self-worth was calculated by the zip codes of her friends and the thread count of her linens. "It has to be flawless, Chloe. Julian's family expects nothing less than absolute perfection. The Vances are high society, and we are not going to give his mother a single reason to look down her nose at us." "I'm barely breathing as it is, Mother," Chloe laughed, a breathy, practiced sound that she used at charity galas and country club luncheons. She turned her head, admiring her own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling gilded mirrors. "Julian says his boss, Marcus Sterling, might actually fly in for the reception. Can you imagine? The CEO of Sterling Tech at my wedding." "That is exactly why the floral budget had to be doubled," Arthur Hayes boomed as he strode into the conservatory. Arthur, a man who wore his tailored suits like armor to hide his dwindling bank accounts, checked his heavy gold Rolex. "We have an image to maintain. The Hayes name means something in this town. When Julian becomes a partner at his firm, we need to ensure the foundation is set. This wedding is an investment, ladies. Pure optics." In the far corner of the room, completely ignored by the trio of self-congratulation, sat Elena. At 32, Elena Hayes was the shadow to Chloe's blinding sun. While Chloe was a vision of sparkling diamonds and ethereal white, Elena was curled up in a faded, oversized gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans, her dark hair pulled back into a messy utilitarian knot. She was perched on a velvet chaise lounge that felt entirely too ostentatious for a Tuesday afternoon, her eyes locked on the glowing screen of her battered laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a quiet, relentless rhythm, processing spreadsheets that would have made Arthur Hayes weep if he knew how to read them. Elena was the family's open disappointment. She was the daughter who hadn't joined the junior league, who hadn't pursued a suitable husband from the country club roster, and who had moved into a modest, minimalist apartment downtown the moment she turned 18. To Beatrice and Arthur, Elena's life was a mystery they had no interest in solving, mostly because they assumed the answer was depressing. They believed she survived on meager freelance writing gigs and odd consulting jobs, scraping by in a world they considered beneath their dignity. "Elena, for heaven's sake," Beatrice sighed, the sharp sound cutting through the quiet hum of the room. She turned her steely gaze away from Chloe's dress and fixed it on her younger daughter. "Do you have to type so aggressively? You're ruining the ambiance. And must you wear that dreadful sweater in here? The seamstress is going to think we dragged you in off the street." Elena didn't stop typing. She didn't even look up. Her face remained a mask of serene, practiced indifference. Over the years, she had built an emotional fortress so thick that her mother's barbs simply bounced off the walls. "I have a deadline, Mother," Elena said, her voice calm, carrying the smooth, unbothered cadence of a woman who had long ago stopped seeking approval. "And the seamstress is paid to hem a dress, not critique my wardrobe. I'll be out of your hair in 10 minutes. Chloe let out a dramatic, long-suffering sigh, adjusting the veil that cascaded down her shoulders. "Let her be, Mom. You know how stressed she gets about her little projects. It's hard out there in the gig economy. Not everyone can have a stable career like Julian." Chloe's tone dripped with a toxic, sugary pity that was far worse than Beatrice's outright disdain. It was the condescension of a victor throwing crumbs to the defeated. Arthur snorted, pouring himself a crystal tumbler of scotch from the side cart. "If you had just listened to me, Elena, I could have gotten you an entry-level administrative job at the bank. It wouldn't pay much, but at least it's respectable work. Sitting on a computer all day in coffee shops. It's a childish way to live. You're 32. It's time to grow up and face reality. Elena finally hit the enter key. A soft ping echoed from the laptop. A wire transfer of $5 million had just been authorized to acquire a struggling logistics firm in the Midwest. She closed the laptop with a quiet snap and finally looked up at her family. "I appreciate the career advice, Dad, but my reality is perfectly fine," Elena said, her lips curving into a faint, enigmatic smile. Beatrice rolled her eyes, adjusting a pearl earring. "Well, just make sure your reality doesn't humiliate us next Saturday. I've already bought you a dress. It's navy blue, very conservative, very inoffensive. It will hide you in the background perfectly." Chloe carefully stepped down from the fitting pedestal, waving the seamstress away. She gathered the heavy skirts of her gown and walked over to where Elena sat, looking down at her younger sister. The height difference, amplified by Chloe's bare feet on the hardwood, made the moment feel like a royal decree. "Elena, listen to me," Chloe said, her voice dropping the sugary sweetness, replacing it with a cold, hard edge of instruction. "Julian's world is very different from yours. It's high-tech, it's venture capital, it's serious business. There are going to be incredibly important people at this wedding. Millionaires, investors, people who hold Julian's future in their hands." "I am aware of what a wedding guest list entails, Chloe," Elena replied mildly, leaning back against the chaise. "No, you aren't," Chloe snapped, her patience fraying. "I need you to promise me something. When people ask you what you do for a living, do not launch into a depressing monologue about your freelance struggles. Don't talk about your little websites or whatever it is you do. Just smile, tell them you're transitioning between roles, and ask them about their golf game. Please, do not embarrass Julian in front of his colleagues. They won't understand your, lifestyle." Elena looked up into her sister's eyes. She saw the genuine panic there, the deep-seated fear of being associated with failure. She saw her mother nodding approvingly in the background, and her father swirling his scotch, watching to ensure Elena complied. They didn't just misunderstand her, they were actively ashamed of her. The realization didn't hurt. It hadn't hurt for a very long time. Instead, it fueled a cold, calculating fire deep in her chest. "I promise, Chloe," Elena said smoothly, her voice a masterclass in pleasant obedience. "I won't say a single word about my little job to Julian's friends. I will be an absolute ghost. You won't even know I'm there." "Good," Chloe said, visibly relaxing. "That's all I ask. Just be supportive. For once." As Chloe turned back to the mirrors, admiring her flawless reflection, the narrator's voice could almost be heard, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain of the Hayes family's grand illusion. What the glowing bride, the proud mother, and the arrogant father did not know was that the ground beneath their polished Italian leather shoes had crumbled to dust months ago. The Hayes family was practically insolvent. Arthur's reckless investments had drained their trust funds, and the ancestral home they were currently standing in had 3 quiet, unpublicized mortgages strapped to its roof. Furthermore, Julian Vance's family, the supposedly wealthy high society dynasty, had flatly refused to pay a single dime for this wedding, viewing the Hayes family as desperate social climbers. The entire charade, the $70,000 dress, the doubled floral budget, the imported caviar, and the crystal chandeliers, had been built on a mountain of high-interest, secret debt that Arthur and Beatrice had taken out in a blind panic to keep up appearances. Or at least that was the plan until the creditors called the loans due 2 weeks before the ceremony. The Hayes family had been exactly 48 hours away from complete financial ruin and a catastrophic public cancellation of the wedding of the decade. But the wedding wasn't canceled. The vendors were suddenly, miraculously paid in full. The dress was released. The champagne was shipped. The crisis vanished into thin air. Arthur and Beatrice believed it was a clerical error, a stroke of divine luck, or perhaps a mysterious grace period from the bank. They were wrong. Sitting quietly in this corner, wearing a faded sweater and holding a battered laptop, Elena stood up to leave. She slipped her computer into a simple canvas tote bag. No one said goodbye as she walked out the mahogany front doors. Elena walked down the driveway, pulling her phone from her pocket. She opened a secure banking app. At the very top of the screen, the balance of EH Capital rested in the high 9 figures. Below it, in the recent transaction history, was a completed wire transfer. Recipient, Larev Events and Bridal. Amount, $150,000. Paid in full. Sender, EH Capital, Anonymous LLC. Elena had bought the dress her sister wore. She had paid for the lilies her mother arranged. She owned the very ground they were standing on to mock her. She got into her modest, reliable sedan and started the engine, staring at the grand house through the rearview mirror. "See you at the wedding, Chloe," Elena whispered to the empty car, shifting into drive. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The rehearsal dinner was held in the private dining room of the Wellington Club, an establishment so exclusive that it didn't bother with a sign on the street, operating entirely on the presumption that if you belonged there, you already knew where the door was. The room was bathed in the warm, amber glow of crystal wall sconces, the tables draped in heavy ivory linen and set with vintage silver that caught the light with every clink of a champagne flute. It was the perfect stage for a masterclass in delusion. Julian Vance stood at the head of the long mahogany table, holding court. At 36, Julian possessed the kind of aggressive, polished charm that often masqueraded as genuine intelligence in Silicon Valley boardrooms. He wore a bespoke Italian suit that fit him like a second skin, his teeth brilliantly white, his dark hair styled with effortless precision. He was currently regaling a captivated audience, mostly comprised of Chloe's extended family and a few of his own fraternity brothers, with the mythological tale of his latest business triumph. "It's all about market disruption," Julian said smoothly, swirling the $50 glass of Bordeaux in his hand. He possessed a voice that projected effortlessly, designed to dominate conference rooms. "Traditional software models are archaic, dinosaurs waiting for the meteor. What we're doing at Advanced Solutions isn't just an upgrade, it's a total paradigm shift in data logistics. And let's just say the big players have started to notice." Arthur Hayes leaned forward from the seat to Julian's right, his eyes shining with a mixture of reverence and desperate greed. "I've always said it, Julian. You have the vision of a true pioneer. And you said the latest funding round is closing soon?" Julian offered a modest, self-deprecating chuckle that fooled absolutely no one. "We are in the final stages of a Series C, Arthur. But it's not just any venture capital firm. We are currently finalizing terms with EH Capital." K-E-A-D. A collective murmur of awe rippled down the table. Even those who didn't work in finance knew the name EH Capital. It was the phantom titan of the investment world, a notoriously secretive, aggressively successful private equity firm that moved billions with surgical precision. They didn't just invest in companies. They acquired them, gutted the inefficiencies, and turned them into gold. The founder and CEO of the firm remained entirely anonymous, a fiercely guarded secret that only added to the firm's mythical status in the financial press. EH Capital, Beatrice breathed, her hand coming up to rest against her pearl necklace. "Oh, Julian, that is magnificent. They only back the absolute best. It's practically a coronation." "Well, Beatrice, when you have a product that practically sells itself, the heavy hitters come knocking," Julian said, taking a sip of his wine. He reached out and placed a manicured hand over Chloe's. "And soon my beautiful bride here won't just be marrying a tech executive. She'll be marrying a titan of the industry." Chloe beamed, leaning into him, the picture of adoring devotion. "I am so proud of you, darling. You work so hard." She then turned her gaze down the table, her eyes scanning the guests until they landed on the furthest, darkest corner of the room. There, seated next to a potted fern and a particularly dull great-aunt, was Elena. True to Beatrice's threat, Elena was wearing the navy blue dress her mother had selected for her. It was a remarkably hideous garment, cut like a conservative potato sack, and designed entirely to fade into the background. Elena had worn it without a single word of complaint. She sat quietly, picking at a plate of roasted duck she had barely tasted, sipping sparkling water. "Isn't that right, Elena?" Chloe called out, her voice slicing through the polite chatter. The table quieted, heads turning toward the younger sister. "Julian is about to close a multi-million-dollar deal with the most prestigious firm in the country. It just goes to show what real ambition looks like." Elena paused, her fork hovering over her plate. She looked up, her expression utterly placid. "It sounds very impressive, Julian. Congratulations." Arthur cleared his throat, a sound heavy with paternal disappointment. "You could learn a thing or two from Julian, Elena. I know you think your little freelance writing or website designing or whatever it is you do on that computer of yours is a career. But there is a massive difference between scraping by in the gig economy and actually building wealth. Julian is building an empire." "I'm sure he is, Dad. Elena replied, her tone perfectly even, devoid of the defensive edge they were all waiting for. Julian offered a magnanimous, patronizing smile. Now, Arthur, don't be too hard on her. Not everyone is built for the pressure of the corporate arena. It takes a certain kind of ruthless drive to secure funding from a giant like Capital. Elena's lifestyle, it's quaint, it's stress-free. There's no shame in living a quiet, simple life. There is when it's a waste of potential, Beatrice chimed in, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. We just worry, Elena. What happens when you're 40, 50? You can't live in a shoebox apartment forever, tapping away at a keyboard for pennies. At some point, you have to face the real world. You should ask Julian if there's a place for you at Advanced Solutions, perhaps managing their social media or answering phones, something stable. I think Julian has enough on his plate right now without worrying about my employment, Mother, Elena said smoothly. I could always make a call to HR, Julian offered graciously, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch to perfection. We usually require a master's degree for entry level, but for family, I might be able to pull a few strings, get you out of that rut. I appreciate the offer, Julian. Truly, Elena said, setting her napkin on the table. If you'll excuse me, I need to use the restroom. She stood up and walked away, feeling the heavy, judgmental stares of her family burning into her back until she slipped out the mahogany double doors. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind her, the noise of the dining room vanished, replaced by the hushed, carpeted silence of the country club hallway. Elena did not go to the restroom. Instead, she walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the club's pristine, moonlit golf course. She opened her small black clutch and pulled out her phone. The screen illuminated her face in the dim hallway. She bypassed her personal messages and opened a heavily encrypted, biometric-locked application. The logo for Capital materialized on the screen, a sleek, minimalist geometric design. Elena opened an unread message from Marcus Sterling, her fiercely loyal chief operating officer and the public face of the company. Because the world needed a face to associate with the billions, Marcus played the role of the ruthless executive, taking the meetings and shaking the hands, while Elena operated the levers from the shadows. The message read, Subject Advanced Solutions, Final Audit, Boss. The forensic accountants just finished the deep dive into Julian Vance's books. It is worse than we thought. The proprietary code he's been selling is a patchwork of open-source garbage. They are bleeding cash. Their burn rate is catastrophic. Without our capital injection by Monday, they will default on payroll and breach 3 major vendor contracts. They aren't looking for an investment. They are begging for a life raft. Do we proceed with the acquisition terms? Elena stared at the glowing text. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of her mouth. The great Julian Vance, the visionary, the titan of industry. He was nothing but a desperate, drowning man wearing a very expensive suit. He was standing in the other room, drinking vintage wine, bragging to her father about a financial triumph while his company was hours away from absolute implosion. He didn't know that Capital never provided life rafts. They didn't do minor venture investments to help struggling founders keep their titles. Capital did hostile takeovers. They acquired failing assets for pennies on the dollar, stripped the management, and liquidated the useless parts. And Julian, in his desperate arrogance, had blindly agreed to a term sheet he clearly hadn't had a competent lawyer read. A term sheet that gave Capital the right to trigger an immediate majority buyout at a catastrophic valuation if certain financial disclosures proved false, which Elena now had absolute proof they were. Elena typed a rapid reply with one thumb. Marcus, proceed as planned. Prepare the buyout execution documents. I want the final paperwork ready for my signature by tomorrow evening. Do not alert Vance's team until the ink is dry. She hit send, locking the phone and dropping it back into her clutch. She stood there for a moment, looking out at the manicured lawns. The irony of the situation was almost intoxicating. Her family was mortgaging their literal home to impress a man who was financially destitute, while simultaneously mocking the woman who held the executioner's axe over all their heads. Hiding from the pity? Elena turned slowly. Chloe had stepped out of the dining room, holding a glass of champagne, her posture stiff and aggressive. The bride-to-be walked over, the heels of her designer shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. I wasn't hiding, Chloe, just catching my breath, Elena said calmly. Chloe took a sip of her champagne, her eyes raking up and down Elena's dreadful navy dress. You really couldn't even pretend, could you? You had to sit there looking like a martyr while Julian was trying to share his good news. You just can't stand it when someone else is successful. Elena tilted her head slightly. I didn't say a word to undermine his success. I congratulated him. It's how you look, Chloe hissed, stepping closer, the scent of expensive perfume and alcohol radiating from her. You have this look of quiet superiority, like you know something the rest of us don't. It drives Mom and Dad crazy, and quite frankly, it pisses me off. You have accomplished nothing, Elena. You sit in your cheap apartment, you wear secondhand clothes, and you judge us. You judge me. I don't judge you, Chloe, Elena said, and surprisingly, she meant it. She didn't judge a mouse for walking into a trap. It was just the nature of the beast. I am simply living my life. Well, your life is an embarrassment, Chloe snapped, the ugly truth of her resentment finally spilling over. Tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Julian's entire executive board will be there. Marcus Sterling himself might be there. These are people who deal in millions. They don't have time for a 32-year-old gig worker who still hasn't figured out what she wants to be when she grows up. So tomorrow, you will sit at the family table, you will smile, and if anyone asks, you will tell them you work in administration. Do not ruin this for me with your pathetic reality. Elena looked at her older sister. She saw the fragile, desperate ego propped up entirely by Julian's fictional wealth and their parents' toxic validation. For a brief, fleeting second, Elena felt a microscopic pang of pity. If she told Chloe the truth right now, that the wedding was paid for by Elena's charity, that Julian was a fraud, and that the Hayes family was bankrupt, it would break the illusion before the public spectacle. But then Elena remembered the years of casual cruelty, the comments about her clothes, her choices, her intellect. She remembered her father telling her she was a waste of potential. She remembered the silence she had endured. The pity vanished, replaced by cold, calculating resolve. I understand, Chloe, Elena said, her voice soft, deferential. I won't say a word about my reality. I promise you, tomorrow will be a day no one in this family will ever forget. Chloe stared at her for a moment, narrowing her eyes, searching for sarcasm. Finding only a placid mask, she scoffed. Just stay out of the way. Chloe turned on her heel and marched back into the dining room, eager to return to the warmth of her false kingdom. Elena remained in the hallway for a few moments longer. She watched the reflection of the chandelier in the dark window pane. Everything was in place. The actors had hit their marks, the stage was set, and the audience was gathering. Tomorrow, the Hayes family would finally get exactly what they had been begging for. They wanted to meet the CEO of EH Capital. They wanted to witness the ruthless power of the corporate arena. Elena smoothed the fabric of her hideous navy dress. Tomorrow, they would. The Grand Plaza Ballroom had been transformed into a suffocatingly expensive imitation of Versailles. Thousands of white orchids spilled from crystal vases, casting delicate shadows across the tables. An orchestra played softly in the corner, almost drowned out by the clinking of baccarat crystal and the low, self-important murmur of 300 guests. It was a monument to the Hayes family's desperation, a glittering facade built entirely on Elena's anonymous dime. Elena arrived exactly on time, wearing the dreadful navy blue dress. She looked like a shadow that had accidentally wandered into a diamond mine. She quietly found her assigned seat at table 42, located as far from the head table as physically possible without being in the kitchen. Throughout the cocktail hour, Arthur and Beatrice Hayes treated their youngest daughter like a slightly embarrassing stain on an otherwise perfect carpet. Whenever a notable guest approached, Arthur would quickly maneuver his body to block Elena from view. "And who is this lovely young woman?" asked Richard Vance, Julian's equally arrogant father, squinting at Elena over the rim of his martini glass. Beatrice swooped in before Elena could open her mouth. "Oh, Richard, this is our youngest Elena. She's in a transitional phase, exploring her options in the freelance world. We are just thrilled she took the day off from her computer to be here." Beatrice's tone managed to convey profound pity and a deep apology all at once. Richard Vance gave Elena a tight, sympathetic smile. "Ah, well, we can't all have Julian's drive, can we? It's good you have a quiet hobby, dear." Elena merely smiled, taking a sip of her sparkling water. "It keeps me very busy, Mr. Vance." Julian, standing nearby, chuckled loudly. "Don't overwhelm her, Dad. Elena prefers the simple life. Let's introduce you to the regional VP of marketing. He's right over by the ice sculpture." As they swept away, leaving Elena alone by a potted palm, the heavy mahogany doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open. A sudden, palpable shift in the atmosphere rippled through the crowd. The orchestra faltered for a half-second before resuming. Marcus Sterling had arrived. At 58, the CEO of Sterling Tech possessed the kind of quiet, terrifying authority that didn't require raising his voice. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored with mathematical precision, his silver hair immaculate. He did not look like a man arriving to celebrate. He looked like an apex predator evaluating a herd. Julian Vance nearly dropped his champagne glass. His eyes widened with frantic, desperate joy. "He came," Julian whispered to Arthur, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "I told you, he actually came to my wedding." Julian practically sprinted across the ballroom, dragging a bewildered Chloe behind him. "Mr. Sterling, Marcus, I cannot tell you what an honor it is that you made the trip. Truly, this means the world to Vance Solutions. And to my beautiful bride, Chloe." Marcus Sterling stopped. He looked at Julian with eyes as cold and flat as slate. He did not smile. He did not offer his hand. "Julian," he said, his voice a deep baritone that carried over the immediate chatter. "Congratulations, though I am not here for the champagne." Julian's smile faltered slightly, but his ego quickly patched the crack. Of course. Business never sleeps. We can schedule a sit-down on Monday to finalize the EH capital terms." "I am looking for someone," Marcus interrupted, his gaze completely bypassing Julian and scanning the sea of faces. "Anyone I can introduce you to?" Arthur Hayes offered, sidling up next to Julian, eager to absorb some of the billionaire's proximity. "I'm Arthur Hayes, the father of the bride. We have several prominent investors here tonight." "No," Marcus said simply. He began to walk forward, forcing Julian and Arthur to scramble out of his way. Dinner was served, a blur of filet mignon and truffle risotto that Elena barely touched. The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus Sterling had taken a seat near the back, refusing all attempts at networking, simply watching the room with a hawk-like intensity. Julian was sweating through his bespoke suit, his eyes darting toward the billionaire every few seconds, terrified he was going to leave before the speeches. Finally, the crystal glasses chimed. It was time for the toasts. The best man gave a predictably crass speech, followed by Arthur, who spent 5 minutes indirectly boasting about the cost of the flowers. And then Chloe stood up. She took the microphone, adjusting her $70,000 dress, her face flushed with champagne and triumph. She looked out over the 300 guests, the wealthiest people she had ever been in a room with, and she felt invincible. "Thank you all for being here," Chloe began, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. She spoke about love, about Julian's brilliant mind, and about the Hayes family legacy. But as the speech progressed, the sweetness began to curdle. Chloe's eyes locked onto table 42. "You know, growing up I always felt the pressure to succeed," Chloe said, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. "To be the responsible one, because, well, not everyone in the family shares that burden." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. Beatrice nodded encouragingly from the head table. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge my little sister Elena," Chloe continued, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the room. Heads turned. Spotlights shifted. Elena sat perfectly still in her ugly navy dress, bathed in sudden, unwanted illumination. "We love Elena," Chloe said, her voice dripping with toxic condescension. "Even if she is 32 and still hasn't quite figured out what she wants to be when she grows up. While Julian and I are building a company and an empire, Elena is. And while she's typing very hard on her little computer in her apartment." The ballroom erupted into genuine roaring laughter. The Vances chuckled. The tech executives smirked. Even Arthur was laughing, shaking his head at his younger daughter's expense. "We keep telling her to join the real world," Chloe said, playing to the crowd, soaking in the attention. "We keep telling her that some dreams have expiration dates. You can't just play pretend forever, Elle. But hey, we support her little hobbies. Maybe one day she'll get a real job and move out of the gig economy. Until then, Julian and I will just have to carry the torch for the family's success." More applause, more laughter. 300 people mocking the quiet woman in the corner. Elena did not flinch. She did not cry. She simply looked at her sister, her face an unreadable mask of absolute calm. At the back of the room, Marcus Sterling stood up. He did not walk toward the head table. He did not ask for the microphone. He walked with terrifying purpose directly down the center aisle, the heavy thud of his footsteps somehow cutting through the dying laughter. The room began to quiet down, a wave of confusion washing over the guests as the billionaire bypassed the bride, bypassed the groom, and stopped directly in front of table 42. Julian, seeing his boss moving, quickly grabbed the wireless microphone from Chloe and scrambled down from the dais. "Marcus, Mr. Sterling, is everything all right? Would you like to say a few words to the bride?" Marcus Sterling ignored Julian completely. He stood before Elena. Then the CEO of Sterling Tech, a man who moved markets with a whisper, bowed his head, a deep deferential bow of absolute submission. He reached out and took the microphone from Julian's trembling hand. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at the woman in the navy blue dress. "Boss," Marcus Sterling's deep voice boomed through the speakers, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I apologize for the interruption." The silence that fell over the Grand Plaza ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that occurs in a vacuum. 300 breaths caught in 300 throats. "The forensic audit on Vance Solutions is complete," Marcus continued, his voice ringing with professional detachment. "The financials are a complete fabrication. The code is worthless. They are insolvent as of midnight tonight." Julian Vance let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "Marcus, Mr. Sterling, what are you talking about? Who are you talking to?" Marcus slowly turned his head to look at Julian, his eyes filled with absolute disgust. "I am talking to my employer, Mr. Vance." Marcus turned back to Elena, holding out a sleek leather portfolio. "Ma'am, the hostile takeover paperwork is finalized. EH. Capital is ready to acquire the remaining assets of Vance Solutions for $1. Do you wish to sign the execution orders now, or would you prefer to wait until the reception is over?" EH Capital. The name dropped like a live grenade into the center of the room. Arthur Hayes dropped his Scotch glass. It shattered against the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot in the dead quiet. Beatrice grabbed the edge of the table, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Chloe was frozen over the podium, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges of the wood. EH Capital, the billionaire titan, the phantom investor. Elena looked at the leather portfolio. Then she slowly stood up. She did not look small anymore. The ugly navy dress seemed to vanish, replaced by the sheer, crushing weight of the power she held in the room. She looked at her sister, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. She looked at Julian, who was shaking violently. Finally, she looked at her parents. "I think," Elena said, her voice calm, clear, and ringing through the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. "I will sign it right now, Marcus. I have a feeling the party is about to end anyway." The morning after the wedding, the Hayes family did not wake up to the warm glow of new beginnings. They woke up to the crushing, suffocating weight of reality. Julian Vance had spent the night locked in a hotel bathroom, frantically calling his legal team, only to be told that the EH Capital term sheet he had blindly signed weeks ago was airtight. There was no loophole. There was no escape. The moment the audit proved his financials were falsified, which they were, EH Capital had the legal right to execute a hostile takeover. By 10 a.m., desperation had mutated into a grotesque form of entitlement. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb outside Elena's modest downtown apartment building. Arthur, Beatrice, and Chloe stepped out. Chloe was no longer the radiant bride. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup smudged, and the Chanel sunglasses she wore couldn't hide the panic radiating from her. They marched up to the third floor and hammered on Elena's door. When Elena opened it, she was dressed exactly as they always despised. Soft gray sweatpants, an oversized white t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun. She held a mug of black coffee. "Elena, darling," Beatrice gasped, pushing past her daughter without waiting for an invitation. She looked around the minimalist, sparsely furnished apartment with newly appreciative eyes. "We need to talk. This whole misunderstanding last night. It was just awful." Arthur closed the door behind them, puffing his chest out to assert a dominance he no longer possessed. "Elena, what a performance. Keeping a secret like that from your own flesh and blood. EH Capital? I always knew you had my head for numbers, but to build an empire under our noses. Well, I suppose I have to respect the hustle. Elena took a sip of her coffee, remaining standing by the kitchen island. "What do you want, Arthur?" The use of his first name made him flinch, but Beatrice quickly jumped in, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be like that. We're family, and family is what matters most, especially now. Julian is, well, Vance Solutions has hit a tiny rough patch." "It's not a rough patch, Mom. He's being gutted," Chloe snapped, pulling off her sunglasses. She glared at Elena, her fear manifesting as aggressive entitlement. "You humiliated us last night, Elena. You ruined my wedding reception. But Julian explained it to me. He says you're just playing hardball, a negotiation tactic. Well, fine. You won the negotiation." "Did I?" Elena asked mildly. "Yes," Chloe demanded, stepping closer. "So now you need to fix it. Julian says Vance Solutions needs an $8 million injection by tomorrow to cover the vendor defaults and payroll. And since you're practically a billionaire, Julian and I were talking. We need a house. It doesn't look good for an executive's wife to be renting. $3 million should cover a decent place in Oakwood." Elena stared at her sister. It was a masterpiece of toxic psychology. There was no apology for the years of mockery. There was no remorse for the public humiliation at the wedding. In their minds, Elena's vast wealth simply meant she was now obligated to fund their delusions. They still viewed her not as a person, but as a resource to be exploited. "Let me make sure I understand," Elena said, her voice frighteningly calm. "After you stood on a stage in front of 300 people and mocked me for being a failure, you are now in my apartment, demanding $11 million? Beatrice rushed forward, placing a manicured hand on Elena's arm. "Oh, Elena, she was just teasing. You know how sisters are. We didn't know the truth. If we had known you were successful, we would have celebrated you, but you hid it. So really, this is just a big miscommunication. You can't let Julian's company fold. If he goes bankrupt, the Hayes family name will be dragged through the mud. Think of your father." "I am thinking of him," Elena said, looking at Arthur, who was suddenly avoiding her gaze. "Elena, please," Chloe said, her voice finally cracking, a shred of genuine desperation bleeding through the arrogance. "He's my husband. You have the power to save his dream. We're blood. You have to do this." Elena looked at the three of them. She saw the greed, the panic, the absolute lack of respect. They truly believed that beneath the title of CEO, she was still the quiet, submissive younger sister who would take their abuse and quietly fix their problems to keep the peace. Elena set her coffee mug down. She let out a long, heavy sigh, expertly feigning defeat. "Fine," Elena said softly. The collective exhale from Arthur, Beatrice, and Chloe sucked the oxygen out of the room. Chloe actually smiled, a triumphant told-you-so smirk flashing across her face. "I knew you'd see reason," Arthur boomed, the paternal arrogance instantly returning. "It's just business after all. Keep it in the family." "Julian's board is meeting tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. at the Sterling Tech offices to discuss the insolvency," Elena said, her face an unreadable mask. "Be there. Bring Julian. I will have Marcus prepare the paperwork for my signature. I will handle Vance Solutions." "Oh, thank you, sweetie," Beatrice cried, stepping forward to hug her. Elena took a smooth half-step back, leaving Beatrice grasping at empty air. "I'll see you tomorrow. I have work to do." As they filed out of the apartment, chatting excitedly among themselves about the new house Chloe was going to buy, Elena locked the door. She picked up her phone and dialed her COO. "Marcus," Elena said, the feigned weakness entirely gone from her voice, replaced by freezing steel. "Have legal draft the final execution, the absolute maximum penalty clauses. I want the boardroom prepped for tomorrow morning." "Understood, boss," Marcus replied. "Are we giving them a golden parachute?" "No," Elena said, looking out her window at the town car driving away. "Cut the cords. Let them fall." Part 5. The Severance of Ties. The boardroom at Sterling Tech was a cavernous space of glass, chrome, and intimidating silence. It sat on the 42nd floor, looking down upon the city like a predatory bird. At 8:55 a.m., Julian, Chloe, Arthur, and Beatrice were seated on one side of the massive oak table. Julian was sweating, his leg bouncing nervously, but Chloe was perfectly composed, sipping sparkling water and looking around the billionaire's sanctuary with a proprietary gleam in her eye. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy glass doors opened. Elena did not wear a faded sweater. She wore a perfectly tailored midnight black Tom Ford suit. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless twist. She looked every inch the ruthless apex predator the financial world whispered about. Marcus Sterling walked half a step behind her, carrying a leather folio. Elena took the seat at the head of the table. She did not say good morning. She nodded to Marcus. Marcus opened the folio and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished wood toward Julian. "Mr. Vance, the final paperwork." Julian let out a breath of relief, reaching for the gold Mont Blanc pen in his pocket. "Thank you, Marcus. Elena, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this capital infusion. With $8 million, we can restructure the debt, and I project we'll be profitable by Q3. "Read the first page, Mr. Vance," Marcus interrupted, his voice devoid of warmth. Julian frowned. He put on his reading glasses and looked down at the document. The room was dead silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. As Julian read, the color completely drained from his face. His mouth fell open. His hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled against the table. "This," Julian choked out, his eyes darting wildly between the paper and Elena. "This isn't an infusion schedule. This is an asset forfeiture." "What is he talking about?" Arthur demanded, leaning forward. "Elena, what is this?" "It is exactly what it says." Elena spoke for the first time, her voice echoing coldly in the large room. "Vance Solutions is bankrupt. The code is useless. The executives are incompetent, and the books are cooked. E.H. Capital is executing its right to a hostile takeover based on your fraudulent disclosures." "Hostile?" Chloe shrieked, standing up. "You said you were going to fix it." "I am fixing it," Elena said coldly, "by removing the infection. Julian, per the contract you blindly signed to get my attention, I am purchasing all of your shares, intellectual property, and assets." Elena reached into her pocket, pulled out a single crisp $1 bill, and flicked it across the massive table. It slid and stopped perfectly in front of Julian's trembling hands. "There is your buyout. $1. You are stripped of your title, your equity, and your access to the building. You also have a 5-year non-compete clause. You're done." "You can't do this!" Julian screamed, slamming his fists on the table, the veneer of the polished executive shattering completely. "I'm your brother-in-law. You're stealing my life's work." "Your life's work is a Ponzi scheme built on open-source code," Elena fired back, her voice raising just enough to command absolute silence. "If I don't execute this takeover, the SEC will be knocking on your door by Friday. I'm not stealing from you, Julian. I'm saving you from federal prison. Sign the paper." "Elena, stop this madness," Beatrice cried, genuine tears of panic streaming down her face. "You are destroying your sister's life. How can you be so cold-blooded? We are your family. We raised you." "Did you?" Elena asked, leaning back in her leather chair. "Because from where I sat, you raised Chloe. You merely tolerated me." "After everything we've done for you," Arthur roared, his face purple with rage. "We put a roof over your head. We gave you the Hayes name. And you sit there, hoarding billions while your own flesh and blood faces ruin? You're a monster, Elena. You're a sick, vindictive little girl." Elena didn't flinch. She simply reached into the inside pocket of her suit jacket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it onto the center of the table. "Look at it," Elena commanded. Julian, shaking, reached out and unfolded the paper. Chloe leaned over to look. It was a bank wire receipt. Sender, E.H. Capital. Recipient, Larev Events and Bridal. Amount $150,000. Chloe gasped, stepping back as if the paper had burned her. What is this?" "That is the invoice for your fairy tale wedding, Chloe," Elena said, her voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. "The dress you wore, the orchids you carried, the champagne you drank while you stood on a stage and called me a pathetic loser. I paid for every single drop of it." Arthur and Beatrice froze, staring at the paper in horror. "The Vances didn't pay for the wedding," Elena continued, looking directly at her parents. "And you couldn't pay for it, Arthur, because the Hayes estate is mortgaged to the hilt, and you have less than $10,000 in liquid assets. You were 48 hours away from public bankruptcy. I bailed you out. I bought the stage so you could all stand on it and mock me." "You?" Chloe stammered, her worldview entirely collapsing. "You paid for my wedding?" "I did," Elena said. "And in return, I got to sit in the corner in a dress Mother chose to humiliate me, and listened to you tell 300 people that I was a failure who needed to learn my place. Well, Chloe, I know my place. I sit at the head of this table. And you? Elena gestured to the crisp dollar bill. You are married to a man whose net worth is currently $1. Julian suddenly spun on Chloe, his eyes manic. This is your fault. You antagonized her. You just had to make that stupid speech. You ruined us. Don't you dare blame me, you fraud, Chloe screamed back, shoving him. As the Hayes family devolved into a screaming match of blame, panic, and shattered egos right there in the boardroom, Elena stood up. She buttoned her suit jacket. Marcus, Elena said, ignoring the shouting match entirely. If he doesn't sign the transfer by 9:30, call the SEC and hand over the audit. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said, standing tall. Elena walked toward the heavy glass doors. Elena, Beatrice wailed, trying to grab her arm. You can't just walk away. We're your family. Elena stopped. She looked at her mother, then at her father, then at her sister. For the first time in 32 years, she felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the clean, weightless freedom of a closed account. I don't have a family, Elena said smoothly. I just had a bad investment, and I liquidated it today. She walked out of the boardroom, the heavy doors sealing shut behind her, cutting off the sounds of their ruin. She rode the private elevator down to the lobby, stepped out into the bright morning sun, and slid into the back of her waiting Maybach. Where to, Ms. Hayes? The driver asked. Elena looked out the tinted window at the city skyline. Back to the office, David. We have a lot of work to do.